about choice. Now, the one thing I've got to say right from the very start, since I'm associated in some measure with this bill on assisted suicide, as we now call it, my position is that there is not a choice between ending your life in that way, seeking assistance to end your life for whatever reason, and palliative care. The one can slip into the other, and should, and I would hope it would, but there's no choice to be made, as far as I'm concerned, between the two. And right from the very start, I've got to say that. The language used is very important. As you yourself said, you hesitated over euthanasia. I think that in United Kingdom English, euthanasia is something that is done by person A to person B. Assisted suicide or assisted dying is person A asking assistance from person B, and it can only be in that way. The initiative cannot be taken by person B. And so it's very simple, but it gets us, I think, into the right parameters. One of the other things that was said was that there are different, it wasn't spelt out, but there's clear implication. There are different cultural groups in our society, and of course there are, and that there would be different responses. All I can say is anecdotally, because I don't have figures to prove it, although I have lots and lots, hundreds of communications from members of the public, there appears to be roughly the same sort of percentage of people in any society like our own, a westernised liberal society. There appears to be roughly the same sort of percentage who would say, I approve of that in principle, in being able to determine for yourself when you die if you want to miss the very end of life because it is intolerable to you. And it appears to be, because I've had lots of people come to me and tell me privately, you'd be surprised because there was churchmen of all denomination, people from the mosque as well, which in some ways pleased me because there was no difference. They were exactly the same in what they said to me, that their personal and private belief system, if you like, allowed for this, even though the leaders of the churches may preach against it. In lots of respects, the churches are probably the only institutions that I would think it proper to have a policy. I don't think the government should have a policy, because the government's made up, as is the civil service, of a range of people, a range of individuals, and each has a private morality which does not offend against, I think anyway, public good if at the end of life they make this choice that I'm suggesting. And everybody's got their own opinion on it. Politicians, civil servants, doctors, everyone. There are people who will argue something else, but that's what I argue. And I would expect the churches probably to be the only institution who should have a policy. Now, what's the proposal? The proposal is that if people who are in full capacity and have a terminal or irrecoverable condition come near to the end of their life, find it intolerable, and ask for help to end it. Now, this can start way back from the time when the decision has to be taken, because you know early on what your attitude is, and it would be a good idea, we think, and this is going to be in the new bill, to register almost with your GP, to go along and say, this is the type of thing that I would want to happen if I find myself in this position. So there is a record of it. The reason for that is actually to allay the fears of the disabled lobbies and the elderly lobbies who said, but we feel vulnerable because there's there's a recognition that death could be assisted legally, we feel vulnerable. And it was to emphasise once again, it's only the person concerned. And if you tell your doctor when you're in fine fettle, yes, if it gets to the bit. Now, all of us, me included, I've got no intention of dying. They'll have to take me out and shoot me. But if it got to the bit, I'd want to know that I had the insurance policy. And it maybe helps other people relax if they feel that there is this added safeguard. So that's, first of all, early notification. At the end of life, or approaching the end of life, if you've decided it's just too bad, like Tony Nicholson, you will remember that case, the locked-in syndrome. I cannot envisage any reason for that man being forced to stay alive, because that was what it was. I don't know who gained from that. I can't believe that as a society we gained. And certainly as an individual, he was tortured and did not have the quiet, dignified death amongst his family that he might well have achieved if assisted suicide had been available. They say that hard cases make bad law. No, I don't think they do. If you work out what you do fairly and equitably with the hardest of cases, I think you could end up with quite good law. I'm sorry if I'm getting very croaky. But the other aspect of our legislation, which people seem to like, is the clear-cut pathway. Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm not normally this. I must have been talking too much. People have told us, because I have spoken in various places now on it, and Peter Warren, who's my assistant, and he's absolutely fantastic on this. He's worked very closely with me. And he was down in London this week at quite a high-flowing meeting. And the English people were there with, what did they call theirs, Jean? Can you remember? No. The one that Charlie Faulkner's heading up in the Lords. Dignity in Dying, but they have a name for their proposal, and I'm really sorry, I've just forgotten what it is. It's different from ours. And I think there was quite a lot of people who were looking on and just wondering, should they stick with what they're going with, which is, it's an attempt to make things easier for people in that dreadful position at the end of life, but it wouldn't have helped Tony Nicholson, it wouldn't have helped Diane Petty, it wouldn't have helped all of the cases that have come to light in England. Now, why have they not come to light in Scotland? Because we're just better at getting by these things quietly. But we've passed that stage. We can't do it like that now. There's going to be more people realise that they can expect to exercise this right. And it's not a medical problem. I don't believe so anyway. I believe it's a problem of justice and the observance of individual rights, individual human rights. And more people are becoming aware of this. And so therefore, I think this has to be faced quite squarely. And people like the fact that we've said that here is the clear pathway, examination by 2 doctors. If you're found to be in a situation where you're suffering from conditions or illnesses that are treatable, they have to be treated first. And if you have them treated and then ask a second time, as we must go through the same application procedure, two people saying that they're not going to benefit from your will, and they know that this is your choice, two doctors agreeing. And incidentally, we've acknowledged the fact that GPs are now making judgments on capacity, much more so than they maybe did previously because of the new legislation. And so it doesn't have to be two psychiatrists, but we would imagine that the guidance that would be handed down to doctors would be, you'll give an opinion as a GP. If you're doubtful, you would seek specialist backup. That's what I would expect anyway. But that, you don't write that into legislation. That's where the professions take responsibility for how the law is applied as best it might in their case. There also has to be a report to the procurator, and so therefore there's another check there to make sure that everything has been done properly. We think, I mean, you never ever get perfect legislation, but we think we've got quite close to it this time, and the bill can be expected before summer. I would like to make sure that it doesn't become entangled with the referendum. Because, I mean, you say, how could it possibly? Things get very tangled up when you've got a referendum. I've been through it in 1979, when all sorts of other considerations crowded out the clear yes-no answer that had to be given. And in some cases, this would be the same. So I hope we managed to keep clear of the referendum, but that's something that's out of my hands.